at my dad's retirement party, he introduced me as the failure. I still remember the way the hall smelled that evening, a mixture of old wood, polished floors, and the faint tang of cheap floral arrangements. It was the kind of scent that only exists in hotel banquet rooms, the kind that makes everything feel both celebratory and slightly artificial, like life has been filtered through a layer of varnish. I walked in with my hands buried deep in my pockets, my jacket clinging awkwardly to my shoulders, and tried to steady the nervous rhythm of my heartbeat. My dad's retirement party. He had worked at the same company for 32 years, and tonight, apparently, the whole office and family were here to honor him. Me? I wasn't exactly sure why I had been invited. The room was buzzing with low conversation, glasses clinking, and laughter that felt too rehearsed. Round tables covered with white linens were dotted with half empty wine glasses, floral centerpieces that seemed more sterile than festive, and plates with the remnants of hors d'oeuvres that no one seemed to be eating. I drifted past the tables, avoiding eye contact, trying to blend into the shadows near the back. I could hear the soft strumming of a live guitarist somewhere near the stage, playing a song that felt almost too cheerful for the undercurrent of tension I carried. I caught sight of my dad across the room before he saw me. He was the same man I'd always known, tall, broad shouldered, impeccably dressed in a navy suit, his hair slicked back, just beginning to show streaks of silver at the temples. There was an energy about him tonight. Pride, yes, but also the kind of authority that makes everyone in a room straighten up just by glancing at him. He was laughing at something a colleague had said, a booming laugh that filled the corners of the hall, and for a moment, I remembered the little boy I'd been, hiding behind his legs in the supermarket, comforted by the sound of that same laugh. But that memory was fleeting. I took a deep breath and stepped closer, hoping the courage I was trying to summon would hold. "Hey, Dad," I said, my voice uneven, and he turned to face me. His smile faltered, just slightly when he saw me. "Ah, there you are," he said, clapping a hand on my shoulder. I was wondering where my favorite disappointment had wandered off to. I froze. The words hung in the air, a joke, he claimed, but I could feel the weight behind them, the subtle sting that had never really gone away. My stomach twisted, and I forced a tight-lipped smile. I, uh, I got caught up at work." He shrugged and laughed again, louder this time as though to convince everyone else that nothing was amiss. But I caught the flicker of something in his eyes, a mix of pity and exasperation that always made me feel like I was failing at being a human being in his presence. "Come on," he said after a moment, gesturing toward the stage. "Let's get this party started." I followed him, my feet heavy, trying not to imagine the speech he would make. The whole evening had been a slow, simmering anxiety in my chest, and now the boiling point was looming. I knew how he liked to do these things. He loved the spotlight, loved the attention, loved the admiration. And somewhere in that formula, I always ended up being the punchline he carried in his pocket, like a secret he couldn't resist revealing. When we reached the stage, the room quieted. Conversations died down as everyone turned toward him, their eyes reflecting a mix of genuine warmth and polite expectation. He cleared his throat, holding the microphone like it was an extension of his hand, and the spotlight shifted onto him. "Thank you all for coming tonight," he began, voice steady and commanding. I never imagined my retirement would feel like such a celebration. But looking around this room, I see friends, colleagues, family, people who have supported me through every late night, every project, every crazy deadline. He paused and the room murmured appreciatively. Then he tilted his head slightly and I felt it coming. "And of course," he said, scanning the crowd with that familiar twinkle in his eye, "I want to introduce someone very special to me, someone I am incredibly proud of." He stepped closer to the edge of the stage, leaning into the microphone, and my stomach dropped through the floor. The spotlight hit me full on, and I felt every eye in the room settle on me like I had suddenly become part of the scenery in a play I didn't audition for. "My son," he said, "the one who taught me patience, resilience. Mostly patience, though. Ladies and gentlemen, meet the failure." The words hit me like a physical blow. There was laughter, polite at first, then louder, and I could see some of my relatives shifting uncomfortably in their seats, glancing at one another, unsure whether to laugh or look away. My hands clenched into fists at my sides. I wanted to disappear. I wanted the floor to swallow me whole. I could feel my face heating up, my ears burning. Dad! I started, but he waved me off, oblivious, or perhaps deliberately ignoring, the rage simmering inside me. Go on, give them a wave. I forced a stiff nod and a half smile that felt like it would crack my jaw. The crowd applauded, and I heard someone whisper, "That's harsh." But no one really stopped him. No one ever really stopped him. I stepped down from the stage, my legs shaking slightly, and moved toward the nearest table. I sank into a chair and let my hands cover my face for a moment. I could hear the echoes of laughter bouncing off the walls, a cruel soundtrack to the embarrassment that had been scripted for me long before I even arrived. Somehow, I made it through the initial speeches and clinking of glasses, but every time my dad's name was mentioned, I felt a fresh twist of humiliation in my gut. The evening continued in a blur of forced smiles, insincere compliments, and that persistent underlying tension I had carried my entire life. The weight of being the one who never measured up in his eyes. I eventually slipped outside, needing air, the night cool against my flushed skin. The parking lot was empty except for a few stragglers and the distant hum of cars on the nearby street. I leaned against the hood of a sedan, letting the silence of the night seep into me, trying to untangle the knot of shame and anger coiling in my chest. And then I heard a voice. You okay? I turned and saw a woman standing a few feet away, her hands shoved deep in her coat pockets. She had a kind face, the kind that made you feel like someone had finally noticed you. There was curiosity in her eyes, but not judgment. Something I hadn't felt in a long time. Yeah, I said quickly, forcing a laugh that sounded hollow even to me. Just needed some air. She nodded, taking a step closer. I get it. Family events can be intense. I glanced at her, then looked away, unsure why I felt compelled to talk to a stranger about the very thing I was desperate to forget. You have no idea, I muttered. Try me, she said, her tone gentle but insistent. Sometimes telling someone who isn't involved helps. And somehow, against my better judgment, I did. I told her about the introduction, the words, the laughter, the way it made me feel small in a room full of people who were supposed to care. I didn't hold back. I let it spill out like a dam breaking. She listened. No interruptions, no pity, just quiet attention. When I finished, I expected a shrug or a nod of sympathy, but instead she smiled faintly. That's rough, she said. But maybe it's not about what he thinks. Maybe it's about what you do next. I didn't respond immediately. Her words were simple, almost naive, but they sparked something inside me, a small, stubborn ember of defiance. Maybe I didn't have to be the character he cast me as in his life story. Maybe I could write my own narrative, one where I wasn't defined by his expectations. We talked for a while longer, about nothing and everything, until the cold finally drove us back inside. When I re entered the hall, the party had changed. The speeches were winding down, people were filing out, and the once bright spotlight on my dad was now dimmed, leaving him standing at the head of a table, surrounded by friends, oblivious to the storm he had stirred. I caught his eye across the room. For the first time that evening, I didn't feel like a failure. I felt ready. Ready to confront the life I had been handed, and maybe, finally, to confront him. The rest of the night passed in a haze. I remember the last toast, the way my dad's eyes lingered on me just a moment too long, and the quiet satisfaction I felt, knowing that the ember she had ignited inside me wasn't going out anytime soon, and then I left. I walked to my car alone, the night sky wide above me, and I made a silent promise. This wasn't the end of my story. Not even close. Little did I know the real reckoning was just beginning, and it was going to be far more complicated, far darker, and far more unexpected than anything I could have imagined that night. The next morning, I woke up to a quiet apartment that smelled faintly of coffee and yesterday's lingering fatigue. My body ached in ways that weren't purely physical. The kind of ache that sinks into your bones when your pride has been bruised more than your flesh. I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the floor, trying to untangle the messy knot of shame, anger, and defiance that had taken root inside me the night before. I couldn't get the look on my dad's face out of my mind. The mix of pride, cruelty, and absolute certainty that he had just told the room exactly who I was. I had spent decades living under that certainty, shaped by it, walking through life with a constant sense of falling short, and now everyone had seen it laid bare. My stomach churned at the thought. I grabbed my phone, scrolling aimlessly through notifications until one message made me pause. It was from her, the woman I had met outside the hall, just her name, simple and unadorned. Hey, coffee today? I stared at the screen, hesitant. I didn't know her name fully yet, didn't know why I trusted her enough to talk the night away, and yet there was a strange comfort in the idea of seeing her again. I typed back a terse, sure, where? The cafe she suggested was tucked down a narrow street, the kind of place that feels hidden from the world. A secret sanctuary with tall windows, the smell of roasted beans, and soft jazz drifting through the air. When I arrived, she was already there, seated in a corner booth with a steaming cup in front of her notebook open but ignored, pen idle. She looked up and smiled when she saw me. Hey, she said. Her voice was calm, inviting, almost like a soft anchor in the storm of my thoughts. Hey, I replied, sliding into the booth across from her. The warmth of the cafe, the muted chatter, and the scent of coffee eased some of the tension knotted in my shoulders, but the memory of last night's humiliation still burned like a fresh wound. I meant what I said, she started, leaning forward slightly. About maybe it not being about what your dad thinks. You can define yourself, not him. I laughed bitterly, the sound low and sharp. Define myself? He's been defining me my whole life. He's he's a master at it. I don't even know who I am outside of what he thinks I should be. She tilted her head, eyes thoughtful. Then maybe it's time to find out. Her words stayed with me long after we parted. That day, I wandered through the city streets, feeling disconnected from everything I had known. Office buildings towered overhead, but they didn't intimidate me. They felt distant, like set pieces in someone else's life. I thought about my dad, about the party, about the way people had laughed at me without even understanding why it hurt. And then I thought about her, the stranger who had seen me, really seen me, and who had suggested that I could be more than the role I had been forced to play. That night, I couldn't sleep. The ceiling of my apartment became a canvas for the thoughts racing through my head. Every memory of my dad's words replayed in vivid, merciless detail. And then, a plan started to form. Not fully conscious, not yet, but like a shadow stretching across a sunlit room. I realized I couldn't keep going like this. I couldn't keep being his failure. Something had to change, and it had to change in a way that would matter. Over the next week, I started small. I began calling old contacts I had drifted away from, rekindling connections I had neglected while trying to live in the shadow of my father's expectations. I dug into projects I had abandoned, projects that I had once believed in but set aside because they weren't practical or worthwhile in his eyes. And through it all, I kept meeting her. Coffee, walks, long conversations that stretched into the evening. She never pressured me, never judged me. She simply listened. And in doing so, she taught me to hear myself. And then it happened. I was walking home one evening, the city streets painted in the golden glow of street lamps, when I noticed a figure across the road. It was my dad. I froze. He didn't see me yet, and I had no idea why he was out here walking alone in the cold. Something about his posture struck me. He wasn't the towering figure I remembered from the party. His shoulders were slumped, his usual confidence replaced by a weariness I'd never seen. I debated whether to approach him. Curiosity warred with a familiar fear, the instinct to retreat kicking in. But something deeper, something I hadn't felt in years, propelled me forward. Dad? I called softly. He turned, startled, his expression shifting from surprise to something unreadable. You? He said simply, as if recognizing me was both inevitable and unwelcome. Yeah, it's me, I said, my voice steadier than I expected. What are you doing out here? He shrugged, looking away. Walking. Thinking. There was a long silence. The air between us felt heavy, charged with unspoken words, and then, almost abruptly, he spoke. "You've changed," he said. "I can see it. There's something different about you." I frowned. Different? How? He gave a small, almost imperceptible smile, the kind that hinted at both pride and regret. Confidence. Edge. "You're not waiting for my approval anymore, are you?" I hesitated. I wanted to say yes, that this was the first time I had truly felt like my own person. But the words got caught in my throat. Instead, I just nodded. For the first time in my life, I saw him not as an infallible authority, but as a man, flawed, human, and in some ways lost. The revelation was strange, almost disorienting, like seeing a familiar city skyline suddenly rearranged. We didn't talk long. He eventually turned and walked away, leaving me standing there, the street lamp casting long shadows across the pavement. But that encounter changed something fundamental in me. For the first time, I realized that the narrative he had written for me, his failure, his disappointment, wasn't immutable. I could challenge it. I could redefine it. Weeks passed, and my life began to shift in ways I hadn't anticipated. I reconnected with old friends, pursued projects I had abandoned, and started carving out a space for myself that existed independently of my father's shadow. The woman from the cafe, her name was Mara, remained a constant presence, a quiet reminder that someone could see me without judgment. Someone could believe in me when I was struggling to believe in myself. But then, the unexpected arrived, wrapped in a package I hadn't anticipated. A letter, handwritten, slid under my apartment door late one night. The handwriting was familiar, my dad's, but the words inside made my stomach churn. It wasn't an apology. Not exactly, it was a challenge. He wrote about the party, about the laughter, about the role he had cast me in. But then he wrote about himself in ways he had never admitted aloud. The pressures, the insecurities, the fear of being irrelevant, the need to control how others saw him. And then, in a final line that struck me like a thunderclap, he wrote, "You're not the failure I thought you were, but I need you to prove it. Not for me, for yourself. Come to the old house. Midnight. Come alone." The letter was both terrifying and exhilarating. My mind raced. Why now? Why like this? Was it a trap? A test? And yet, beneath the fear, there was a pulse of anticipation, a spark of curiosity that I couldn't ignore. That night, I couldn't sleep. My apartment felt smaller, the shadows longer, the silence oppressive. I kept thinking about my dad, about the words he had spoken at the party, about the glimpse I had seen of the man behind the facade. And then I thought about Mara, about the small ember of defiance she had sparked in me. I realized I wasn't afraid of confronting my father anymore. I was afraid of what I might discover. And so, when the clock struck midnight, I found myself driving through the silent streets, toward the old house on the outskirts of town, the one that had been in our family for generations, the one I hadn't stepped foot in since I was a teenager. The headlights cut through the darkness, illuminating the overgrown driveway, the rusted gates swinging in the wind. I parked, heart hammering, and stepped out, the cold biting through my jacket. The house loomed before me, silent, brooding, almost alive. I could feel its history in every creak of the wooden panels, every shutter rattling in the wind. I took a deep breath and stepped toward the front door, knowing that once I crossed this threshold, nothing would be the same. The door opened before I could knock. My dad stood there, shadows hiding his expression, and for the first time, I saw him truly vulnerable. Not the man at the party, not the infallible father, but a man weighed down by life, by fear, by expectations he had projected onto me for decades. "Come in," he said softly, almost hesitantly. "It's time we talked. Really talked." I stepped inside, and as the door closed behind me, I realized that the story was only beginning. The real reckoning, the one I had been unknowingly preparing for, was about to unfold. The air inside the house was thick with dust and memory, the kind that clings to your clothes and your hair, settling into your lungs if you let it. My footsteps echoed on the wooden floor, each creak a reminder that this house had been built long before I was born and had witnessed more than anyone alive could recount. My dad was a few paces ahead of me, his silhouette stretched against the dim light of the hallway, a figure both familiar and alien. You remember this place, don't you? He asked, voice quiet, almost vulnerable. There was no humor in it tonight, no pomp or authority, just a raw, unguarded question. I nodded. Yeah, I remember. It's been a long time. He stopped in front of the grand staircase, the banister worn smooth by decades of hands gripping it. He leaned against it, folding his arms, and for a moment he just watched me. I felt the weight of his gaze, heavy with expectation, unspoken judgment, and something else, something I couldn't name. I wrote to you, he said finally, his voice steady but carrying a tremor I hadn't heard before. Not because I wanted to scare you, but because I needed you to understand something, something I've never said. I felt my chest tighten. Understand what? I asked cautiously. He looked away, his eyes tracing the shadows that danced across the cracked wallpaper. That sometimes what you see on the surface, it's not the truth. Not about people, not about life, not even about yourself. There was a pause, long enough for the silence to become almost tangible. The house seemed to hold its breath with us. I wanted to ask him to clarify, to tell me what he meant, but I didn't. I had learned over the years that pressing too hard usually made the answers worse, or at least more painful. I made mistakes, he continued, voice low, almost confessional. Big ones. Ones that cost people, cost me, and maybe cost you, and yet somehow I survived. Somehow I kept the illusion alive that I had everything under control. But it's not control, it's fear. Fear of being exposed, fear of failing, fear of being irrelevant. I felt my stomach twist. The words were like knives, cutting through layers of resentment I had built up over decades. I had always assumed that his harshness was innate, that it was who he was. But now I realized it was something else entirely. It was armor. And for the first time, I saw the man behind the armor. Not invincible, not infallible, just human. You think introducing me as the failure at the party was cruel? He asked, turning to face me fully. His eyes were sharp now, almost pleading. Maybe it was. But it wasn't just to humiliate you, it was a test. A way to see if you could survive being defined by someone else. If you could take it and still keep moving. I blinked, unsure whether to laugh, cry, or throw something at him. My voice caught when I finally spoke. You think humiliating me for decades, making me feel small, is a test? That's that's not a lesson. That's it's just pain, he interrupted softly. Yes, it's pain. And you can hate me for it. I don't blame you if you do, but pain, it teaches things you won't learn any other way. I stared at him, the anger and confusion battling with a strange, creeping empathy I hadn't felt before. The man who had introduced me as the failure, who had laughed while the room watched me shrink under his words, was now standing in front of me like a wounded animal. And for reasons I couldn't fully comprehend, part of me didn't want to fight him. Part of me wanted to understand. We moved into the living room, the walls lined with photographs in thick frames. My dad as a boy, my mom smiling faintly beside him, images of vacations, milestones, moments frozen in time. And then I saw it. Me as a child, standing stiffly beside him, my smile forced, my small hands clenched at my sides. The memory hit me like a freight train. The countless times I had tried to meet his expectations, to earn the approval that always seemed just out of reach. I wanted you to be strong, he said, following my gaze to the photo. I thought if I pushed you, if I tested you, you'd rise above. I didn't realize. I didn't realize how much it would hurt you. I swallowed hard. You didn't just push me. You made me feel like I was nothing, like I was broken. His jaw tightened, and I saw the shadow of regret pass over his face. Maybe I did. Maybe I failed you in ways I'll never be able to fix. But I need you to hear me. I need you to know that the man you see now, who laughs, who mocks, who fails, is not the sum of who I am or who you are. You are more than that. And so am I. There was a long silence. The air between us was thick, electric, charged with all the unspoken words, years of tension, and the fragile possibility of understanding. And then he did something I never expected. He handed me a small, worn box. "What's this?" I asked cautiously, feeling the weight of it in my hands. "Open it," he said, voice almost a whisper. Inside was a collection of letters, yellowed with age, tied together with a faded ribbon. I lifted the top letter carefully, my fingers trembling. The handwriting was my mother's. The letters were full of words I hadn't seen since childhood: encouragement, love, apologies, and confessions I had never known. She had written about my father's struggles, about her fears for both of us, about the way she had tried to protect me while navigating her own pain. And then there was a final note, one that made my blood run cold. "Your father isn't just harsh. He's hiding something. Something he fears more than failure. Something that could destroy him if it ever comes to light. You need to be careful. Trust no one completely, not even him." I looked up at my dad, who was watching me intently, eyes unreadable. "What? What does this mean?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. He sighed, running a hand over his face. "It means that the life you've been living, thinking you were the failure, thinking I was just a hard man, it's only part of the story. There are things I've kept hidden, things I didn't know how to tell you, and now I think it's time." The room felt colder, the shadows deeper. I felt a chill run down my spine, the kind that whispers of secrets long buried and the danger that comes with uncovering them. He led me upstairs to a small room at the end of the hall. The door was locked, and he fumbled with a key he had pulled from his pocket. When it opened, I saw a collection of files, photographs, and old documents spread across a desk and pinned to the walls. It looked like a shrine to a life lived in secrecy. "What is all this?" I asked, my pulse racing. "My life," he said simply. "The parts I couldn't tell you, the decisions I made, the mistakes I covered up, the people I hurt, all of it. And now you need to understand it. If you're ever going to be free of the label I gave you, if you're ever going to be yourself, you need to know the truth." He stepped aside, gesturing for me to look closer. And then I saw it, something I never expected. Photographs of business dealings, faces I didn't recognize, locations marked in ways that hinted at illicit activity. Not the minor corruption or office politics I'd imagined, but something darker, far darker. My father, the man who had seemed so invincible, so upright, was entangled in things I couldn't yet comprehend. I I don't understand," I stammered, backing away slightly. "You will," he said, "and I need your help. Because if this comes out, if anyone finds out before you're ready, it won't just destroy me. It could destroy us, our family, everything we've worked for, and I trust you. I have to trust you." For a moment, the air was electric, charged with fear, shock, and the thrill of something forbidden. I realized with a sinking feeling that the world I thought I knew, the world of failure, shame, and small humiliations, was only the surface. Beneath it lay secrets that could change everything. And now I was standing at the threshold of knowing them. I looked at my father, and for the first time in my life, I didn't feel small. I felt alive. And I realized that the next step, diving into this hidden world, confronting the truth, and deciding whether to embrace it or reject it, would define me in ways nothing else ever could. The room smelled of old paper and dust, the kind of odor that clings to memory and doesn't easily let go. I stared at the collection of documents and photographs on the desk, the walls plastered with files and maps, and tried to make sense of the magnitude of what I was seeing. It was like stepping into a life I'd never been allowed to witness, a world where every decision, every misstep, every deception was laid bare in stark, unforgiving detail. "Dad," I said, my voice trembling, what is all of this?" He didn't answer immediately. He only motioned for me to come closer. "You remember the party?" he said finally. "The words I used to introduce you?" I nodded, the memory sharp and raw, the laughter and humiliation still echoing in my mind. "They weren't just a joke," he said, his tone quieter now, almost pained. "They were preparation. You think I wanted to humiliate you? Maybe a little, but I needed you to understand that the world doesn't care about niceties. The world cares about survival. And what I'm about to show you, it's survival. I hesitated, my chest tightening. Survival? You mean all this, all of these secrets? He nodded. Yes, the mistakes I made, the people I deceived, the risks I took, they were all for the sake of protecting our family. And now the consequences are coming due. And I need you to help me navigate them, or I'll be destroyed. And so will everything we've built. I could feel the weight of the words pressing down on me, the gravity of the choice before me. I'd spent my life feeling powerless, small, incapable, defined by a label he had assigned me. But now, for the first time, I realized I had power to act, to decide, to take part in something that could change everything. I moved closer to the desk, scanning the photographs. Faces of men and women I didn't recognize, locations marked with strange symbols, documents that hinted at financial irregularities, clandestine meetings, and deals that seemed illegal, though the details were maddeningly incomplete. My hands shook as I traced the outlines of the evidence. This, this is serious, I said finally. You could go to prison. People could get hurt. Why would you, why would you involve me in this? He looked at me, his eyes intense, the kind of gaze that makes your chest tighten and your mind focus entirely on him. Because you're the only one I trust. You're the only one who can see the truth and act without letting fear or ego cloud your judgment. I failed to protect you in many ways before, but I can't fail now. Not this time. The room felt smaller, the air thick with tension. I realized that my entire life had led to this moment, the humiliation, the failures, the endless struggle to earn his approval. It had all been preparation in a way I hadn't understood until now. What do you want me to do? I asked, my voice low but steady. He handed me a folder, thick with documents. Learn, understand, and when the time comes, act. You will see things that will shock you, make you question everything you've believed. But you have to trust me, and you have to trust yourself. I opened the folder and began reading. Financial records, private correspondence, coded messages. I didn't understand all of it immediately, but the pattern was undeniable. There were deliberate manipulations, hidden transfers, a network of influence that spanned companies, people, and governments. And at the center of it all was my father. I felt a mixture of awe and fear. This wasn't just about him or our family. It was about power, control, and the lengths people would go to protect what they valued. And suddenly, my own life felt insignificant against the enormity of what I was uncovering. Dad, this is bigger than I thought, I whispered. Bigger than anything I could have imagined. He nodded. And it's about to get worse. Someone knows. Someone is coming for us. They've been watching, waiting for the right moment. And if we're not careful, everything collapses. The words sank into me like ice. My pulse quickened. Who? I asked. He shook his head. I don't know, but they're clever and they're patient, and they won't stop until they get what they want. That's why you're here. You need to learn everything, understand everything, and be ready to act. Because when the storm comes, you may be the only thing standing between us and total destruction. I swallowed hard. The weight of responsibility pressed down on me, but I felt something else rising. A fierce determination, a spark of defiance that had been smoldering ever since that night at the retirement party. I had been called a failure, mocked, humiliated, and yet now here I was, facing the most critical challenge of my life. And for the first time, I didn't feel small. I felt alive. The next few days were a blur. My father guided me through the documents, explaining the connections, the stakes, and the hidden dangers. I learned about people who had once seemed harmless, only to discover they were part of a larger, more dangerous network. I saw evidence of manipulation, bribery, threats, and betrayals that spanned decades. Every revelation left me more unsettled, more aware of the fragility of life and the precariousness of trust. And yet, through it all, I felt a strange exhilaration. I had been underestimated my entire life, written off as a failure, ignored, belittled. But now I was part of something larger than myself. I was learning, understanding, and slowly, I began to see patterns, connections, strategies. My mind, which had always been overshadowed by doubt and fear, was coming alive in ways I hadn't imagined. Then, one night, as we pored over a particularly sensitive set of files, the first unexpected twist occurred. A knock at the door. Soft, deliberate, almost polite, but it sent a chill down my spine. Who? Who could that be? I whispered. My father froze, his face darkening. Stay here, he said, moving toward the door. And whatever you do, don't open it if I'm not back immediately. I watched him leave, heart pounding. Minutes stretched into what felt like hours. Then a sound, a faint creak in the floor, a shadow moving in the corner of the room. Someone was inside. I reached for the nearest object, a heavy bookend, and gripped it tightly. The fear was electric, but beneath it was a strange, thrilling awareness. For once, I wasn't powerless. I had to act. And then he stepped into the room. Not my father, someone else. A man in a dark coat, hood pulled low, face obscured. The first words he spoke chilled me to the bone. Looking for the truth? I froze. Who, who are you? He chuckled softly, almost mockingly. I've been watching for a long time. Your father's secrets are fascinating. And now it seems you're part of the story, too. Before I could react, he lunged toward the desk, scattering papers and files. I swung the bookend instinctively, striking him. He stumbled back, but only for a moment, and then he was advancing again, faster, more determined. My mind raced. I had been unprepared for this, unprepared for the danger, for the immediacy of the threat. And then, in a flash of realization, I saw the pattern in the chaos. The man's movements, the way he tried to distract me, the way he was focused on one thing, taking something from the desk. I acted on instinct. I lunged, grabbing the folder of most sensitive documents and pulling it toward me. He slammed into me, knocking us both to the floor. Papers flew like snow, images and letters strewn across the room. I wrestled with him, muscles straining, heart pounding, until finally he paused, caught off balance, and I saw my opening. With every ounce of strength, I pushed him back, sending him crashing into a chair. He scrambled to his feet, and for the first time, I saw his face. A mask of determination, yes, but behind it, something familiar. Recognition. And then, a horrifying twist. It was someone I had known, someone I had trusted, someone I thought was neutral. The realization hit me like a blow. The threat wasn't random. The danger had been closer than I imagined. Someone had been inside our lives, watching, waiting, manipulating events from the shadows. And now, the true battle had begun. I stared at him, the folder clutched to my chest, heart hammering. And in that moment, I realized that the story my father had written for me of failure, shame, and humiliation was only the beginning. The real story, the one that would test every skill, every instinct, every ounce of courage I had, was about to unfold. And I knew, deep in my bones, that nothing would ever be the same again. I froze, the folder pressed against my chest, my mind racing faster than my pulse. The figure before me, the intruder, was someone I had known, someone I had trusted. The shock rendered me momentarily paralyzed, and in that heartbeat of hesitation, he lunged again. But then, fate, instinct, or perhaps some buried part of me I didn't know existed, kicked in. I twisted, dodged, and slammed the folder onto the floor between us. Papers scattered like autumn leaves, evidence of decades of secrets exposed in chaotic motion. For a split second, I saw the shock in his eyes, and in that fraction of a second, I understood everything. The betrayal had been hiding in plain sight. You, I said, voice trembling but cold. It was you all along. You were the one watching, waiting. He sneered, pulling a knife from his coat, a movement so fast it was almost theatrical. I'm not your enemy, he said. I'm just cleaning up what your father left behind. You don't know the half of it. I realized he was right in a way I didn't want to admit. My father's empire of secrets, manipulations, and hidden power had created a world I had only begun to glimpse. And now, the fallout was reaching out like tentacles, threatening to engulf anyone who stood too close. Instinct took over. I grabbed a nearby chair and swung it at him, forcing him to stumble back. The room became a blur, shouts, crashing furniture, papers flying in every direction. And then, in a moment of brutal clarity, he slipped, fell, and the knife clattered across the floor. I stood over him, chest heaving, eyes wide, trying to reconcile the enormity of what had just happened. Why? I demanded. Why all this? Why come here? He looked up at me, face twisted with something between defiance and fear. Because someone has to take responsibility for your father's mistakes. He built a house of cards and now it's falling. You, son of the man he humiliated, are the only one capable of holding it together, or destroying it completely. It hit me like a punch to the gut. All the years of feeling powerless, of being mocked and called a failure, had been preparation for this moment. And now, the choice wasn't abstract. It wasn't about approval or shame. It was life and survival, and the weight of consequences far larger than I could have imagined. I picked up the knife carefully, turning it in my hands. My mind raced. I could fight. I could run. I could walk away and let the world unravel, but something inside me, something hard, stubborn, defiant, made the decision. I would not be passive anymore. I would not allow fear to define me. I pressed the knife into the floor, not to attack, but to assert control, to stake my claim in a world that had long treated me as insignificant. Enough, I said, voice steady, commanding. It ends now, whoever you are, whatever you think you're doing. It ends tonight. The intruder froze. The air between us became heavy, electric, and then, as if some invisible mechanism had been triggered, he spoke in a quiet, almost reverent tone. Your father, he prepared you for this more than you realize. You've grown into someone he never expected, but someone who can survive. I stared at him, comprehension dawning like the first light of morning. All the humiliation, all the ridicule, all the nights of feeling like I would never measure up. It had led to this moment. My father's cruel words, his public ridicule, the constant pressure, they had been shaping me, molding me into someone capable of confronting the unimaginable. And then my dad appeared at the door, calm but authoritative. It's done, Gisa, he said. I trust you. It was a strange, almost cinematic alignment of fate. The failure, the son who had been belittled and overlooked, standing at the center of a storm he had been unknowingly preparing for all his life. The intruder, powerless in the face of someone who had learned, grown, and now understood the full spectrum of his potential. The confrontation ended not in violence, but in realization. The intruder, defeated by our combined awareness and preparedness, retreated into the shadows, leaving only the echo of threat and the reminder that the world was dangerous, unpredictable, and unforgiving. I sank into a chair, the adrenaline fading, replaced by a quiet, reflective exhaustion. My father sat opposite me, a rare vulnerability in his eyes. I didn't know how else to prepare you, he said softly. I only knew that you had to survive what's coming. And you have. You've finally proven yourself. I realized in that moment that failure had never been a reflection of who I truly was. It had been a challenge, a test, a crucible that had forged strength, awareness, and resilience from years of mockery and neglect. And now, standing on the other side of that crucible, I understood the truth. My identity had never belonged to him. It belonged to me. We sat in silence for a long time, the weight of the night settling around us like a thick blanket. Outside, the wind whispered against the old windows, the shadows shifting like ghosts of the past. And in that silence, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Clarity. It was terrifying and exhilarating and deeply, profoundly human. I had been called a failure. I had been humiliated. I had been overlooked, but I had survived, grown, and finally claimed my own narrative. And as I sat there, listening to the quiet hum of the old house, I realized that the story wasn't really about revenge, power, or even the secrets my father had kept. It was about identity, resilience, and the courage to confront not just the world, but the people who shape us for better or worse, and to rise above the expectations, the ridicule, and even the love that constrains us. I looked at my father, and for the first time in decades, I didn't see a tyrant or a judge. I saw a man, flawed, human, afraid, powerful, and deeply, irrevocably connected to me. And I understood something fundamental. Our lives, our stories, are never just the sum of what others declare them to be. They are the sum of what we choose to do with them, how we respond, and what we are willing to confront. And in that quiet, heavy moment, I made a silent promise to myself. I would never again let anyone, no one, not even my father, define the limits of my worth. I would live, learn, and act with courage, even in the face of fear. Even when the world demanded that I shrink, I would rise. And perhaps, in some strange cinematic twist of fate, that was the truest victory of all. As the room settled into a hush, I couldn't help but reflect. How much of our own lives are dictated by the expectations of others? How often do we allow humiliation, criticism, or fear to shape who we become? And when faced with betrayal, danger, or the revelation of hidden truths, do we rise to confront it or retreat, allowing the narrative to be written by someone else?